Welcome back to another in our series of the parables of Jesus. Our parable today is the Prodigal Son from Luke chapter 15. We'll begin reading in verse 11. And he said, There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house, and he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Literary scholars have noted that all literature fits into certain categories. The plots can be thus: overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, the voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. Within these, we may find conflicts that occur: man versus self, man versus man, man versus nature, man versus society, man versus machine and technology. You can further break these down and then break those down. It can become rather complicated, and I'll leave that to scholars and experts. Our parable today contains a storyline that is ancient, the story of the return home. If you were to sit down and make a list of your favorite stories and books and movies and such, you might be surprised how many of those fall into the category of the voyage and return home. It is timeless and gives us a good feeling knowing the story has a happy ending. The overarching theme of this parable is based upon the beginning of the chapter, when we are told in verse 1, Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering near to hear him. The Pharisees and scribes grumbled, saying, This man receives sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable. All 3 parables that follow deal with the lost and found. Yesterday, we looked briefly at the lost sheep and the lost coin. Those were valuable for sure, but not to the extent of the lost son. The first 2 required someone to search and find them. The lost son needed to find his way back home. Each succeeding parable draws us in closer and closer to the concept of finding something that was lost. Perhaps we can relate to a degree the concept of the sheep and coin being lost. But the last act of this trilogy, as it were, draws us, each of us, in and opens our hearts and tugs at those strings therein to bring us near to the characters, though we've never met them. That's what a good story does. Yet, this is more than just a good story. It's more than a story that makes us feel good. I wonder what those of the Pharisees and scribes felt when they heard this parable. Was this parable too difficult and layered in mystery for them to grasp that they indeed were the older brother, who was indeed felt the younger brother was unworthy? Still, it was the Father's, yea, God's prerogative to honor that son who came to his senses and returned. In the spectrum of human experience, people don't always follow the script of this story. So many pursue endlessly those vices that bring ruin, and it consumes them. So many never come to their senses. So many let pride stand in the way of return. So many, like the older brother, refuse to welcome them back. Yet I have scarcely ever met a parent that didn't long for the prodigal's return and watched the horizon in hopes that they might catch a glimpse of a soul that came to its senses. Can you relate to this parable? Are the strings of your heart tugged when you hear it? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another parable of Jesus.